Before the internet reshaped how we spent our time, a typical British evening followed a predictable pattern. Work hours and school timetables set the rhythm. Dad got home around 6. The kids were already back from school, watching whatever was on the telly or doing homework at the kitchen table. Mum was preparing the evening meal, or someone was, if both parents worked. By 7 or half past, the family sat down to eat, usually with the TV on in the background. After that, there wasn't much else to do. You could read a book, listen to records, or carry on watching TV. The options were limited. There were 3 or 4 channels, and if nothing good was on, you were stuck with it. This meant most people drifted into the living room by 8 or 9. Everyone ended up in the same space because that's where the entertainment was. The whole household gathered round the telly, whether you wanted to or not. In working-class British homes, tea was what you called your evening meal, and it got eaten somewhere between 5:30 and 7 o'clock. This wasn't afternoon tea with fancy cakes. This was proper food, the main meal if you'd been out all day. The timing was strict. You came home, washed your hands and face, sat down at the table. It might be something hot, like a meat pie or fried eggs and bacon, or cold ham with bread and butter and pickles if money was tight. The whole family gathered round, and this was when you actually talked about your day at work, what happened at school, sorting out any problems. Once everyone finished, the women and girls cleared the plates and washed up while the men moved to their chairs to read the paper. Only after everything was put away and the table wiped clean did the evening properly start. Tea was the dividing line, work and obligations on one side, your own time on the other. The room you gathered in, whether you called it the sitting room, the parlour, the lounge or the front room, was probably the coldest space in your house for most of the year. Not because of poor insulation, though that didn't help. It was because most families only lit the fire when visitors came or on Sundays. Coal cost money, and lighting an extra fire meant more work. So the front room sat empty most days, furniture stiff under lace curtains, and aspidistra growing in the corner despite the chill. The fireplace was usually black cast iron with decorative tiles that needed regular polishing. Furniture ran to hard upholstered chairs arranged formally, maybe a sofa if you had means, small tables for teacups or ornaments. Everything faced inward because there wasn't much to face, no television, no radio yet. The room shaped behavior simply by existing. You sat upright, spoke carefully, kept your voice down. Then you left quickly to return to the warm kitchen where real life happened. Before television arrived, the radio was the evening's main event. Families would gather round the wooden cabinet in the living room once dinner was cleared away, everyone sitting quietly while the valve tubes warmed up and started humming. You might catch a news bulletin first, hearing about events from across the country or the latest from abroad delivered by a voice that felt like it was speaking directly to you. Then perhaps a drama would come on, something like The Shadow, where you had to picture everything based on voices and sound effects. Comedy programs were hugely popular, with shows like Jack Benny making millions laugh at exactly the same jokes at the same time. Music broadcasts brought big bands into ordinary homes, performances you'd never afford to see in person. The whole thing required a different sort of attention than watching telly does now. You couldn't glance at a screen, you had to actively listen and imagine. That shared silence, everyone focused on the same invisible story, created a particular family moment that doesn't really exist anymore. From the late 1940s through the early 1970s, most American homes had exactly one television set. This single black and white box sat in the living room, usually a 12-inch screen mounted inside a wooden cabinet. You had 3 channels, NBC, CBS and ABC, and that was your entire universe of options. The Sunday newspaper included a weekly TV guide, and families would circle their preferred shows with different colored pens to stake their claim on viewing time. When disputes arose about what to watch, the hierarchy was simple. Mum or dad made the final decision. Children sat cross-legged on the floor directly in front of the screen, whilst adults claimed the sofa and chairs behind them. If you wanted to watch a program, you showed up in that living room at the scheduled time, or you missed it entirely. There was no recording, no second chance. This appointment viewing created something we've lost, though the next morning at work or school, everyone had watched the same programs. Water cooler conversations were genuine shared cultural moments rather than the fragmented discussions we have today. Limited choice accidentally created national unity. Television in the 1960s and 70s meant organizing your evening around specific programs, because if you missed them, they were gone. No catch-up, no recording, just the broadcast. Certain programs became appointment viewing, shows that structured your entire week. Coronation Street on Monday and Wednesday evenings was sacred time in millions of homes. Morecambe and Wise at Christmas pulled in 28 million viewers, nearly half the country watching the same jokes at the same moment. Families would hurry through dinner because the generation game started at 8 and you needed everyone settled in their usual seats for the opening credits. Quiz shows like The Golden Shot ran at weekends when the family was guaranteed home. If someone was late back from work or football practice, there'd be genuine anxiety because the program wouldn't wait. This created a strange kind of discipline, a collective routine where millions of households moved in synchronization with the broadcast schedule. You either watched it then or missed it entirely, and missing it meant being left out of conversations at school or work the next day. After school came homework hour, and this meant the kitchen table transformed into a makeshift classroom. You'd come home, grab a snack, biscuits or crisps, and spread your exercise books across the same surface where the family would eat dinner 90 minutes later. If you had siblings, you were all competing for table space and parental attention. Your mum or dad would be making dinner while supervising your long division, shouting questions across the room while stirring a pot. The telly in the next room was a constant distraction, especially if your brother had finished his work and got to watch programs whilst you were stuck on question 7. Younger siblings wandered through looking for toys. The baby needed feeding. The same 4 square meters meant for quiet study was also where someone was frying sausages, where the toddler was having a meltdown, where the cat was meowing for dinner. You were expected to focus on spelling tests with all this chaos, and most nights ended in tears or shouting. Nobody had their own desk or bedroom study space. It was just how homework got done. Before screens took over every evening, families needed something to fill those long winter nights and rainy weekends. Board games and card games did the job nicely. You would sit around the dining table after dinner, pull out a battered Monopoly box or deck of cards, and settle in for an hour or two. The classics got passed down through generations. Grandparents taught grandchildren how to play rummy or whist. Parents introduced kids to snakes and ladders, then graduated them to Scrabble or chess when they could handle more complex rules. These games brought out interesting family dynamics. Someone always got competitive about Monopoly and refused to trade properties. Another person would sulk when they lost at checkers. The youngest child would try to cheat at Go Fish until they got caught. But mostly these evenings meant laughter, arguments about the rules, and a genuine reason to sit together without anyone disappearing to another room. Winter kept everyone indoors anyway, and games gave you something to do besides stare at the walls. Before screens took over every spare minute, people filled their evenings with hands-on hobbies that actually required some effort. Crossword puzzles from the newspaper would sit half-finished on a table for days, picked up whenever someone had 10 minutes and a pen. The cryptic ones could take an entire week to crack. Jigsaws spread across dining tables meant the family ate dinner on their laps for a week, while a puzzle with 1,000 pieces slowly came together into a cottage or mountain scene. Knitting needles clicked away in front of the telly, producing scarves and jumpers that people actually wore rather than bought. Model aeroplanes demanded real concentration. Tiny plastic parts glued together carefully over several sessions until you had something you could hang from the ceiling or display on a shelf. Drawing and sketching filled notebooks, even for people who weren't particularly artistic. These activities kept your hands busy and your mind occupied in a way that just watching something never quite managed. You were making something or solving something, not just consuming content. The satisfaction came from finishing a puzzle or holding up a finished jumper. It was tangible. Reading time became one of those evening routines that quietly took over households without much planning. By the 1960s, families were settling down with books, magazines, newspapers after supper. For children, bedtime reading became almost ceremonial. Mum or dad would sit on the edge of the bed with a storybook, reading a chapter before lights out. This wasn't just entertainment, it was how kids learned to focus and build vocabulary without realizing it. Some families made it strict, 20 minutes every single night. Others read whenever the moment felt right. Once kids could read independently, many kept it going themselves, torch under the covers after official bedtime. Adults had their own reading time, usually in armchairs with tea, working through novels or the evening paper. Comics were massive with children, easier than full books. The shared versions created something special, everyone quiet but together in the same room. Reading before bed actually slowed heart rates and settled the nervous system after a busy day. It shaped how entire generations learned to wind down. For most of history, if you wanted music in your home, someone had to make it. That meant the family piano getting a hammering in the front room, or your mother singing while she pegged out the washing. Music wasn't something you consumed passively, it was an event you participated in. The whole family would gather round the piano on a Sunday evening and belt out songs together. Everyone singing whether they could carry a tune or not. When gramophones arrived in the 1920s and 30s, choosing a record became a deliberate ritual. You'd flip through your modest collection of shellac discs, select one carefully because each only held about 3 minutes of music per side, then wind up the machine and lower the needle with that satisfying scrape. Later, vinyl records in the 1950s and 60s made the experience richer but no less intentional. You'd put an album on and actually listen to it, often with others in the room. The music filled the space and everyone present was part of it. Tape players and cassettes in the 1970s continued this shared experience. You made mixtapes for friends, recorded songs off the radio, played them at gatherings. Music at home was social, not background noise. The telephone sat on the wall in the hallway or perched on a small table in the kitchen, and that single device served the entire household. You'd pick up the receiver to make a call or answer when it rang, and immediately everyone within earshot knew your business. The coiled cord stretched maybe 2 meters if you were lucky, tethering you to that spot whilst your mum washed dishes nearby or your siblings wandered past on their way to the loo. Privacy simply didn't factor into the equation. If you wanted to use the phone, you accepted that your conversation would be semi-public. Everyone in the house heard the ring, everyone knew roughly who was calling and how often, and everyone had opinions about how long you'd been monopolizing the line. Calls stayed brief and practical for the most part because lingering on the phone with family members hovering nearby felt awkward. Today, everyone carries a private device and conducts hours-long conversations behind closed doors. But back then, the phone was a shared household utility like the cooker or the bath, not a personal tool. Before everyone had a mobile phone in their pocket, social life worked differently. You couldn't text ahead to arrange every little interaction, so people just showed up. This was called popping round, and it was completely normal. On a weeknight evening around 7 or 8, you might hear a knock at the door. It would be a neighbour wanting to borrow something, or a cousin stopping by after work, or a friend who happened to be in the area. You'd invite them in, put the kettle on, and have a chat in the kitchen or sitting room for 20 minutes, or maybe an hour. The house didn't need to be spotless, and you didn't need to prepare anything special. They were seeing you as you actually were, not the tidied-up version you'd present for a planned visit. Sunday afternoons were especially popular for this. Families would visit other families without any formal arrangement. This meant people saw each other face-to-face constantly, not just when schedules aligned weeks in advance. It kept communities tighter and friendships more spontaneous. Your social life happened in real time, in real spaces, with real conversations. Where you spent your evenings outside the home depended heavily on where you lived and what class you belonged to. For working class men in industrial areas, the local pub or working men's club was the natural destination after work. These were democratic institutions run by their members who elected committees and voted on business. Pubs served a similar function but lacked the formal structure. Women's presence varied dramatically by region and respectability. In rougher districts, women drank alongside men without comment. Middle-class families gravitated towards church halls, amateur dramatic societies, or community groups that emphasized improvement over the casual sociability of the pub. In the summer months, when the days stretched long, kids stayed outside until they were called in for tea. This was just how it worked. You left the house after breakfast, and that was pretty much it, until someone's mum stood at the front door and shouted your name down the street. The rule was simple: be home when the streetlights came on, or when you heard your name being yelled, whichever came first. Bikes got ridden hard on pavements and through back alleys, and games of British Bulldog happened in the middle of the road with kids scattering when a car appeared. There was tag or tig as it was called in some places, and hide and seek in gardens that weren't yours, and elaborate make-believe scenarios involving dens made from old cardboard boxes or bits of wood. Nobody checked where you were, and nobody rang to see if you were all right. The neighborhood itself was the playgroup, and every kid in it was fair game for whatever was happening that evening. Parents trusted you to sort out your own disputes, find your own fun, and show up when called. You came home muddy and hungry, and that was a good day. Bedtime in a Victorian household followed a rigid pattern starting well before anyone got into bed. First came tidying up around 7:30. Toys went back where they belonged, dolls arranged on shelves, wooden blocks sorted into boxes. While children cleared their things, someone drew the bath, hauling hot water from the kitchen range. Bath time meant sharing. 3 or 4 siblings took turns in the same water, oldest first, youngest last, when it had cooled and gone a bit murky. After drying with rough linen towels, nightgowns went on, plain white cotton buttoning at the neck. Hair got brushed thoroughly, 100 strokes if your mother held to the old advice, then plaited tight or tucked under a sleeping cap. The fire was banked low, window shut against night air, then came the good part. Story time. A parent sat bedside reading from a picture book, voice dropping, quiet as eyelids grew heavy. Prayers followed, a quick kneeling recitation, then into bed for the final tuck-in and goodnight kiss.